She pulled up to the wrong house and I didn't tell her right away. She sat in the car for a moment, looking at her phone, then at the house, then at her phone again. The particular expression of someone whose GPS has just made a very confident mistake. Then the back door opened, and a small boy climbed out, looked at the desert like it was the best thing he'd ever seen, and ran straight for my dog. Hi, my name is Cal Rivers. I'm 33 years old, and I live in Marfa, Texas, a town of 2,000 people in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert, where the sky is so big it makes you feel either very small or very free, depending on the day. I restore old adobe houses and rent a few of them out to writers and artists who come looking for something they can't find where they're from. I don't advertise much. Word gets around. I've been doing this for 6 years. It suits me. The work is honest, the desert is quiet, and the people who end up here usually need the space more than they need company. I keep to myself. I have a dog named Duff who takes his job as property supervisor very seriously, and a workbench that has seen more honest hours than I can count. I wasn't expecting anyone that Tuesday in October. The booking was for Wednesday, when the old blue Subaru turned into the wrong driveway and a woman got out squinting at her phone like it had personally misled her. I watched from the porch for a moment before saying anything. She had dark hair and a camera bag, and the particular look of someone who had been driving for a long time and was running on determination and not much else. Then the back door opened and a small boy climbed out. 6, maybe 7. Red sneakers. A notebook clutched to his chest like it was something important. He looked at the desert and then at Duff, and then he ran straight for the dog without any hesitation at all. Duff, to his credit, sat very still. The woman's head came up fast. She started toward the boy, and that's when I signed, without thinking, "Careful, he bites strangers." The boy stopped. He looked at my hands, then he looked at me, a long, serious look, the kind children give you when they're deciding something. Then he signed back, "Does he bite you?" I looked at Duff. "Never," I signed, "but I'm not a stranger." The boy considered this. Then he walked the rest of the way to the dog and held out his hand, palm down, the way I'd shown him without meaning to, the right way to greet an unfamiliar animal. Duff sniffed it and wagged once. The woman had gone completely still. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between surprise and relief, and something else that went by too fast for me to name. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "I did anyway." She looked at the boy, who was now sitting cross-legged in the dust with Duff's head in his lap, completely content. Then she looked at me. "I'm a day early," she said. "I know that too," I said. "Come inside anyway." Her name was Wren Cole. She was a book editor from New York, freelance now, traveling to meet a writer named Paul Garrett, who lived 20 minutes outside Marfa, and had spent 4 years working on a novel she believed in more than anything she'd worked on in a long time. The boy was Pip, her older sister Danny's son, 7 years old, born without hearing, who was supposed to be with Danny this week and wasn't because Danny's situation was complicated, in the way some people's situations are always complicated, which meant Wren had driven 11 hours with a 7-year-old and a car full of work she hadn't finished, and arrived a day early at the wrong house. I made coffee. Wren sat at the kitchen table and held the mug in both hands and didn't apologize for any of it, which I appreciated. Pip explored the house with Duff following him room to room like an assigned escort. We could hear them, the soft thud of sneakers on tile, the occasional clatter of something being examined. "He won't break anything," Wren said without looking up from her coffee. "He's very careful with things he doesn't own." "I'm not worried about it," I said. She looked up, the expression again, the same one from the driveway, the one I hadn't been able to name. "How do you know sign language?" she asked. "Pip's the first deaf person I've met here." "Not the first," I said. "There was a boy who came to the center every summer for 3 years. He was 12 when I met him. I learned so I could talk to him." "What center?" "Nature education. I run programs for kids out of the Chinati Land Trust. Hiking, astronomy, desert ecology." She studied me for a moment. "You restore houses and run a nature center, and occasionally make bad coffee," I said. She looked at her mug. "It's actually good." "It's the altitude," I said. "Everything tastes better here." She almost smiled. "Not quite, but close." I showed them the house, the right one, 50 yards up the road, a single-story adobe with a wide covered veranda that faced west and caught the sunset full on every evening. Simple inside, good light, a kitchen that worked and a bathroom with a deep tub that I'd retiled myself 2 summers ago. Pip went straight to the back room with the window seat and signed to Wren without looking away from the view. "He says this is his room," Wren translated. "He's right," I said. "It is." Pip turned and looked at me with that same serious assessment. Then he nodded once, satisfied, and went back to the view. I left them to settle in. At the door I paused. On the kitchen counter I'd put a small bunch of fresh desert sage and a jar of local honey. I did it for all the guests, had done it for 6 years. But that evening I stood on my own porch looking at the light going down behind the mountains and thought about Wren holding the coffee mug and the way she'd looked at me when I said I did anyway, and I told myself it meant nothing at all. The desert doesn't lie to you the way some things do. I should have listened. Wednesday morning I was up before the light the way I always was. I made coffee and took it to the workbench and started on the window frame I'd been fitting for the east bedroom of the house next door. The desert in the early hours had its own particular silence, not emptiness but presence, the way the air holds something before the day starts. Around 7 I heard the screen door of the rental house. I didn't look up. 10 minutes later Wren appeared at the edge of my property with 2 mugs. She stopped at the low fence line. "I made extra," she said. "I guessed black." I looked at the mug she was holding out. "You guessed right." She handed it over the fence and stood on her side with her own cup and looked at the window frame I was working on. "What's wrong with it?" she asked. "Frame's warped. 100-year-old wood. It moves in the heat. Can you fix it?" "Already did," I said. "Now I'm just making sure." She looked at the frame, then at me. "That sounds like something I do with manuscripts," she said. "Fix them and then read them again to make sure." "Same idea," I said. Pip appeared behind her in the doorway, notebook in hand, still in his pajamas. He signed something. "He wants to know if Duff can come over," Wren said. I looked at Duff, who was already sitting at the fence looking at Pip with his whole body. "Duff," I said, "go." Duff went through the gap in the fence like he'd been waiting for permission. Pip dropped to his knees in the dust immediately. Wren watched them. Her coffee mug was halfway to her mouth and she'd forgotten about it. The morning light was low and gold, and the mountains behind the rental house were still purple in the shadow. She looked like someone who had been moving very fast for a long time and had just stopped for the first time. I didn't say anything. I went back to the window frame. She stayed on her side of the fence and finished her coffee and didn't say anything either. It was a good kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't need filling. She was supposed to stay 3 days. The 3 days passed. She didn't leave. She called it work extending. Paul Garrett's manuscript needed more time, another meeting, another revision conversation. I believed her. I also noticed that she was on the veranda most mornings before I was up, sitting with her laptop and the coffee she made for both of us now without asking, watching the desert come into the light. I noticed other things. The way she always left the veranda lamp on when she worked late, not for herself, for the light that fell onto the path between our houses. The way she asked questions about the desert with genuine curiosity, not the performative kind tourists used. The way she signed with Pip, imperfect but earnest. The way you do something when you care more about being understood than about being correct. Pip had taken to following me on my morning rounds. He'd appear at the fence with his notebook and his sneakers and Duff beside him and walk with me while I checked the irrigation lines and the solar panels and the condition of the properties. He drew things in his notebook. The desert plants, the shape of the mountains, Duff's ears, once a very accurate rendering of my workbench that he showed me with the serious pride of someone who has captured something true. I taught him the signs for things we saw. Hawk, cactus, cloud. The particular word for the light that comes just before sunset in the desert, which I'd made up myself because there wasn't a standard sign for it and it deserved one. He learned them all immediately and then tested me on them, correcting my form with the patience of someone who had been correcting adults his whole life. One evening Wren was on the veranda watching us come back from the south property. I handed Pip a small piece of red rock I'd found, iron oxide, the color of the sunset. He turned it in his hands and then signed something I didn't catch. He says it looks like it's still on fire, Wren said, from the veranda. She was looking at Pip, but I was looking at her. I went home and made dinner and didn't examine why I was still thinking about the way she'd said that. Still on fire. I wasn't ready to examine it yet. The third day Wren came to the workbench. Not to talk. She brought her laptop and sat on the low wall at the edge of the shade and worked while I worked. She'd done it without asking, which was either confidence or the particular comfort of someone who had decided she wasn't going to be a guest anymore. I didn't say anything about it. I kept working. Duff positioned himself between us with the equal loyalty of a dog who has identified two people worth his attention. Around noon she looked up from her screen and said, "What are you making?" "Window frame, for the East Room. The wood is beautiful. It's mesquite, local. It moves in the heat, but if you fit it right, it moves the right way." She looked at it for a moment. "Everything here moves in the heat." "Yes," I said. "You learn to work with it." She looked at me. Something moved across her face. There and gone. She went back to her screen. Pip came back from wherever he'd been in the desert with Duff. They'd been to the arroyo, I could tell by the mud on both of them, and sat beside Wren and opened his notebook and started drawing. Mother and son practically, the shape of it, the ease of it, the way she moved over automatically without looking up. I watched them for a moment. The light was good, the desert was quiet, the mesquite frame was coming along. I thought about how I'd been doing this for 6 years. The restoring, the renting, the careful care of other people's stays. How I'd gotten good at being the background of other people's visits to this place. How I'd stopped noticing it. I noticed it now, not because anything had been said, because of the particular quality of a Tuesday afternoon in October, with a woman working on her laptop and a boy drawing in his notebook, and the sound of a dog shaking mud off himself in the desert heat. Because of how right it felt, and how long it had been since anything had felt right without effort. I sanded the window frame. I didn't examine any further than that. I wasn't ready. In the second week, Paul Garrett came to the rental house. I saw his truck in the drive on a Thursday afternoon and thought nothing of it. An hour later, Wren knocked on my door. She came in and sat at my kitchen table with the look she got when something had gone wrong. Contained, working through it. "His publisher dropped the book," she said. "This morning, he just found out." She looked at the table. 4 years of work. I've been editing this manuscript for 18 months. It's the best thing I've worked on. What happened? The new editorial director wants commercial. Paul's book is not commercial. It's true. She paused. Those aren't always the same thing. I made tea. She didn't ask for it, but she wrapped her hands around the cup when I set it in front of her. We sat for a while. Pip was at the rental house. I could see the back room light on from my kitchen window, the shape of him at the window seat with his notebook. "He's thinking about shelving it," she said. "Paul. He says if the publisher he trusted doesn't want it, maybe the book isn't what he thought it was." She looked at her tea. "That's not true. The publisher just changed his mind about what he wanted to sell. That's different from the book being wrong." "Does Paul know that?" "I've told him." "Does he believe you?" She was quiet. "Not yet." I thought about a publishing contact I had, an editor at a small independent press in Santa Fe, who had been asking me for 2 years if I knew any writers working in the landscape tradition. I'd mentioned it once to someone and nothing had come of it. I didn't say anything to Wren about it, but the next morning I found the editor's number and I called. I didn't tell Wren what I'd done. I had no idea if it would amount to anything. A phone call, a name passed along, the kind of thing that either opens a door or doesn't, and you have no way of knowing which until it does or it doesn't. What I knew was that the book existed, that Wren believed in it with the specific certainty of someone who reads for a living and knows the difference between good and true, and that Paul Garrett had driven out to the desert 4 years ago to write something honest and deserved someone in his corner who wasn't motivated by what it could sell. I went back to work. Wren went back to her veranda. Pip went back to his notebook and his morning rounds with Duff and me. The days had found their shape without anyone deciding on one. Wren worked in the mornings, I worked in the mornings. We met at the fence around 10 with coffee and stayed for 20 minutes talking about nothing important and a few things that were. In the afternoons, Pip claimed both of us. drawing lessons he attempted to give Wren, who was genuinely bad at it, and genuinely trying, and long walks through the desert where he named everything in signs and made sure I confirmed the vocabulary. In the evenings Wren cooked. She hadn't said anything about it, it had just happened, the way things do when three people spend enough time in proximity, and someone turns out to be good at a thing. She made simple food, careful food, the kind that takes longer than it looks like it should. I washed the dishes. Pip dried them, badly and with great concentration. After Pip went to bed, we stayed on the veranda. Not every night. Sometimes she worked, sometimes I did, but often enough that it had become a thing. The desert at night in October was cold and clear. The stars so present they felt structural, like they were holding something up. We sat with blankets and talked or didn't talk, and watched the sky do what the sky did out here, which was everything. One night she said, "I keep extending the stay." "I know," I said. She looked at the stars. "I'm not sure I know how to leave." I didn't answer. The question was bigger than the words, and we both knew it. After a while she went inside. I stayed on the veranda for a long time after that, looking at the stars, not thinking about anything in particular. Or so I told myself. The night of the stars. I'd been running the astronomy program for 4 years, a weekly thing in the South Field, open to whoever wanted to come. Pip found out about it from a flyer he found stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. He brought it to me signed. "This, when?" "Friday," I signed. He held up 4 fingers, 4 days. Then he nodded firmly, like the decision had been made, and went back to his room. Friday came. Pip was ready an hour early, standing at the door in his red sneakers with his notebook and a flashlight he'd found somewhere, looking at me with the patience of a child who has learned that adults are often late to the important things. Wren came too. She hadn't been invited specifically, it wasn't the kind of thing you needed an invitation for, but she came and stood at the back of the small group and watched. 7 kids, 2 parents, 1 Pip, and Wren with her hands in her jacket pockets and the cold desert air around all of us. I showed them Saturn. That was the night I remember, not for anything that was said or done, for the sequence of small things, the way Pip pressed his eye to the eyepiece and went very still. The way he pulled back and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before. The look of someone who has just understood something about the scale of the world and hasn't decided yet whether to be frightened or exhilarated. I signed, "It's real." He signed back, "I know." Wren was watching us. When I looked over, she turned back to the telescope quickly, but not quickly enough. Walking back to the houses afterward, the stars overhead doing what they always did out here, Pip walked between us. After a while, he took my hand and Wren's hand and kept walking. He didn't sign anything, he just held on. We let him. We didn't say anything to each other for a long time after that. The kind of silence that means something has happened and you're both deciding how to hold it. The call came on a Thursday in the 3rd week. Wren was at Paul's place for the afternoon. I was on the south property replacing a section of damaged fence when my phone rang, the editor in Santa Fe. She'd read the first 50 pages Paul had sent over. She wanted to talk seriously. I finished the fence section. I drove back to the house. I sat on the workbench for a while. I hadn't done it for Wren. I'd done it because the book deserved a chance, and I happened to know someone who might give it one. That was all. That was the whole of it. Wren came home at 5. I could see her through the kitchen window of the rental house, standing at the counter with her phone, not moving. Then she put the phone down and stood very still for a moment. Then she came outside and walked across to my side of the fence and stood there. "Paul just called me," she said. "An editor in Santa Fe reached out. She read the first 50 pages. She wants to talk about the book." She looked at me. "Cal, yeah, did you do that?" I looked at the fence line. I know someone who works in that space. I thought it was worth a call. She was quiet for a long moment. "You didn't tell me. I wasn't sure it would go anywhere." "That's not why you didn't tell me." I looked at her. She was right. I hadn't told her because I hadn't wanted it to be a thing, hadn't wanted credit, hadn't wanted her to feel like she owed me something, hadn't wanted to change the shape of what was happening between us by making it into a gesture. "No," I said, "that's not why." She held my gaze for a long moment. The late afternoon light was going gold on the mountains behind her. "Thank you," she said, very quietly. "Not about the editor, about all of it. Thank you." Pip left on a Monday. Danny drove out to get him. Same truck, steadier this time, cleaner, with the particular look of someone who has been doing the work of getting better and knows it's not finished but is doing it anyway. She and Wren sat on the veranda for an hour while I stayed at the workbench and didn't listen, which meant I could hear everything. They talked about Danny's situation, about the medication, about a job possibility, about Pip, who was easier here, steadier, more himself than Danny had seen him in months, she said. They talked the way sisters talk when the difficult things are finally being said instead of carried separately. Pip found me at the workbench before they left. He had his notebook. He opened it to a page near the back and showed me a drawing he'd been working on for a week. I could tell by the care in it. The 3 houses, mine, the rental, the south property, the mountains behind, Duff in the foreground, 3 small figures on the veranda. He'd labeled them in his careful block letters, CAL, WRNN, PIP. Under the drawing he'd written one more word, HO-M. I looked at it for a long time. He watched me look. I signed, "Can I keep this?" He tore it out of the notebook carefully and handed it to me. Then he hugged me once. The full kind, both arms, brief and certain, and went back to where his mother was waiting. I stood at the workbench holding the drawing after their truck had gone. The desert was very quiet. The mesquite frame was finished and leaning against the wall. Wren appeared at the fence line a few minutes later. She didn't say anything. She just stood there for a while, looking at the mountains. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded. "You?" "Yeah," I said. She looked at the drawing in my hand. I held it up so she could see. She was quiet for a moment. "He knew," she said. "First day." "I know," I said. "He told me." She looked at me sideways. "What did he say?" I thought about the sign he'd used, the one for the desert light, repurposed. "He used the word for the light before sunset," I said. "For us." Wren looked at the mountains for a long moment. Then she looked back at me. "That's exactly right," she said. The call came from New York on a Saturday morning. Wren's old editor at the publishing house she'd left. A senior position had opened. They wanted her back. Good salary, her own list, everything she'd been working toward before she went freelance. She told me about it that evening on the veranda. Pip was inside, asleep early. He'd had a long day in the desert, had walked farther than usual and come home happy and exhausted. The stars were out. The air was cold. She had the blanket pulled around her shoulders and her coffee going cold in her hands. "It's a real offer," she said. "I know," I said. "Good timing, too. Paul's book has a home. The work here is done." She looked at the mountains. "Is it?" I didn't answer right away. The desert at night doesn't rush anything. It just waits. "What do you want to do?" I asked. She turned the cold coffee mug in her hands. "I want to know what you think." "Wren, I know. It's my decision." She paused. "I just want to hear what you think." I looked at the stars. At the rental house where Pip was sleeping. At the veranda we'd spent 3 weeks on, talking and not talking, watching the sky do its slow, enormous work. "I think," I said slowly, "that you came here for 3 days and stayed 3 weeks. And every morning you were on that veranda before I was up. And you learned the sign for a kind of light that doesn't have a standard word for it. And you make coffee for 2 people now without thinking about it." She was very still. And I don't think that has anything to do with Paul Garrett's manuscript." The mountains were dark shapes against a sky full of light. She put the cold coffee down on the porch rail and turned to look at me. "Cal." "Yeah, I'm not good at this," she said. "At knowing when to stop moving." "I know," I said. "I'm not good at asking people to." She looked at me for a long moment. "So what do we do?" I reached over and took the cold coffee mug off the railing before it fell. I set it on the ground. I looked at her. "You could call them back on Monday," I said. "Or you could tell me what the sign is for the thing that happens when you realize you don't want to leave." She was quiet for a very long time. The stars moved the way they always did out here. Slowly, certainly, indifferent to any particular human difficulty. Then she signed it. Slowly. Her own version, not a standard sign. Just something her hands did that meant it exactly. I understood. I took her hand. She let me. We stayed on the veranda until the cold drove us inside, and by then it had been decided, the way things get decided when they've been true for long enough. Not announced, just acknowledged. She called New York on Monday, she thanked them, she turned it down, she stayed. Pip found out on a Tuesday. We hadn't told him, he'd figured it out the way perceptive children figure things out, by paying attention to what the adults around them were doing and drawing accurate conclusions. He came to find me at the workbench that morning, notebook under his arm, Duff at his heels, and signed, "Is Wren staying?" "Yes," I said. He nodded once, with the satisfaction of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. Then he opened his notebook and showed me the drawing he'd been working on. It was the three of us, on the veranda, stars above, Duff at the edge, the mountains in the background, slightly wrong in the way his drawings always were slightly wrong. Too tall, too close, but entirely right in the feeling of them. Underneath, in careful block letters, he'd written, "Home." I looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked at him. He was watching me with that serious, patient assessment, the one he'd turned on me in the driveway on the very first day. I signed, "You knew." He signed back, "First day." Then the sign I'd taught him, the one for the light before sunset, the one I'd made up because it needed a word. He used it for something else entirely, for the veranda, for the three of us, for whatever it was that had been building since a woman drove up to the wrong house, and a small boy ran toward a dog he didn't know. And I told him, without thinking, careful, he bites strangers. I looked at Pip. He looked back at me with complete certainty, the way children look at things they understood before the adults did. I thought about Wren saying, "You came here for 3 days and you stayed 3 weeks. I thought about coffee made for 2 without asking. About a veranda lamp left on in the dark. About a publishing call made quietly, with no expectation of credit. About the sign for a kind of light that doesn't have a standard name. Some things know what they are before you do. You just have to be still enough to let them arrive." There was a week in November I keep coming back to. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the thing. It was just a week. Monday, Wren made coffee and brought it to the fence at 7, and we talked about the manuscript she was reading, and a problem with the south property drain, and the color the mountains turned in the early light when the clouds were a certain way. Tuesday, Pip signed me a story he'd written in his notebook, entirely in signs, no words, 12 pages. It was about a dog who could see the future. Duff was the obvious inspiration. The ending involved Saturn. Wednesday, I fixed the kitchen faucet in the rental house without being asked. Wren found me doing it, and leaned against the doorframe and watched without saying anything, and handed me the wrench when I needed it, without my asking for it, which meant she'd been watching closely enough to know. Thursday, Paul Garrett came by with the first pages of the revised manuscript. He and Wren sat on the veranda for 3 hours. I could hear them through the window. Not the words, just the particular rhythm of 2 people working on something that matters to both of them. Pip taught Duff a new trick in the yard. I built a bookshelf for the east bedroom. Friday, astronomy night. Afterward, sitting on the veranda, Wren said, "I've been thinking about the New York offer. And I think I already know the answer." She looked at the stars. "I think I've known for a while." I didn't push it. She didn't say it yet. But it was there. In the way she said it, in the particular quality of someone who has stopped fighting something and is deciding how to say it out loud. Saturday, I made dinner for once. Simple, roasted things from the market, bread I'd made badly and she'd improved by adding something without asking. We ate at the kitchen table with Pip between us and Duff at the door, and the stars coming on one by one outside the window. Sunday, she slept late. I left coffee in the thermos outside her door. When she found it, she knocked on mine and showed me the thermos and raised her eyebrow. "Altitude," I said. "Everything's better here." She laughed. The real one, the one that meant she'd stopped performing and was just being. That was the week. Nothing happened. Everything happened. I understood the difference. The months that followed were the quietest and fullest I'd had in years. Wren set up her work at the kitchen table of the rental house, which became less of a rental house and more of just the house, without either of us making a formal declaration about it. She edited from there, called writers from the veranda, argued with manuscripts at the kitchen table, and occasionally read me sentences that stopped her, not for feedback, just to have them heard out loud. I went back to my work, restored the east bedroom window, finished the south fence, checked the irrigation, did my rounds with Pip, who had extended his vocabulary considerably and was now correcting Wren's signing with the ruthless precision of a boy who takes accuracy seriously. Paul Garrett's book sold to the Santa Fe Press in December. Wren drove to Paul's place when she heard, and came back with the particular brightness she got when something she'd believed in turned out to be right. She stood in my kitchen and said, "It's going to be published." She said it quietly, like something she was still letting herself believe. "Yeah," I said, "it is." She looked at me. "You knew that first call would work." "I hoped," I said. "I didn't know." "What made you call?" I thought about the night she'd sat at my kitchen table with the tea she hadn't asked for, and said, "It's the best thing I've worked on." About the particular weight of certainty in those words. Not hope, not ambition, but the kind of knowing that comes from someone who has read enough to understand the difference. "Because you were sure," I said, "and you're not sure about things unless they're worth being sure about." She was quiet for a moment. "How do you know that?" "I've been paying attention," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she went back to her laptop and I went back to the window frame, and the desert did what it always did, which was go on being itself, quietly, at a scale that made most human urgency feel small and most human love feel large. Spring came to the desert the way it always did. Not suddenly, but in accumulation. A little more green on the hillsides each week. The return of certain birds, the particular smell of the creosote after rain, which was the smell of the desert being glad. Pip came back in April. Danny had gotten steadier, not fixed but steadier, the way some things get when someone decides to try, and she brought Pip herself this time. Stayed 2 days, sat on the veranda and watched her son run through the desert with a dog, and a man who knew how to talk to him, and didn't say anything except thank you when she left. Pip had grown 3 inches. He walked into the house like he owned it, which he did in every way that mattered, and went straight to the back room with the window seat and signed. "Still mine, still yours," I said. He nodded. The first evening, the 3 of us went out to the South Field for the astronomy program I ran on Friday nights. A small group, local kids, occasionally a tourist who'd found out about it. Pip had been asking about this since October. He sat in the front and watched everything and corrected my signs twice, which made the other kids laugh. Walking back, Pip took my hand on one side and Wren's on the other. He signed something without stopping walking, looking straight ahead at the lights of Marfa in the distance. "He says," Wren said, her voice a little different, "that this is what home feels like." I looked at the lights of the town, at the desert around us, patient and enormous, at Wren walking beside me with her hand in mine and Pip between us signing things into the dark. The first day he came, he had looked at me across the driveway and signed, "Does he bite you?" And I had said never, but I'm not a stranger. He'd been right about that faster than I had. That night on the veranda, after Pip was in bed, Wren sat close and looked at the stars. The desert was doing what it always did. "He was right," she said quietly. "First day." "About what?" She looked at me. "You look like someone who stays." I held on. The stars moved slowly overhead, the way they always had, the way they would long after either of us. The desert was still. The house was warm behind us. Duff was asleep at the door. Some people arrive at the wrong house and find exactly the right place. She did. I think I did too.